The 2026 NBA championship quest for the Minnesota Timberwolves is officially over. They fall 4 games to 2 to the San Antonio Spurs and are on to the offseason. We put a bow on the season, take a look at what's next, what moves the Timberwolves might make, and then we jump into a quick Spurs Thunder preview and some Minnesota Vikings talk today on the Nordic Wolf podcast. Welcome to the Nordic Wolf podcast. I am your host, Eric Darris. We are on the first episode of the off-season edition of the podcast. The Minnesota Timberwolves dropped a 139-109 game to the San Antonio Spurs on Friday night. And like the last two seasons, the closeout game got ugly. And unlike the last two seasons, it feels like the Timberwolves are needing a bit of a reset because the status quo is not working. And I don't want to really go too far into the game because it is what it is. We saw what happened. They were outclassed by the Spurs. And then there's also the Thunder, who are the deepest team in the league. So, I mean, the Minnesota Timberwolves have a long ways to go to get there. And I don't even know if it's possible right now. Those two teams have been built so well with some luck, some great drafting, and some good quality trades. You know, teams were built a little bit differently. The Thunder were built with the SGA trade, which gave them just a boatload of picks along with the MVP, and the Spurs won the Victor Wembanyama sweepstakes, and he's just that good. He's got potential to be the best player of all time, honestly, if he doesn't get injured. So the Timberwolves don't have the draft capital to get to that point, and when you have Anthony Edwards in his prime, that's probably not the best solution to tank because then he's going to want out. So that's a total team reset, and I don't think that's the direction the Timberwolves should go. But what separates us from the Thunder and the Spurs outside of that? Because that's, I think, the first step to figuring out what the Timberwolves do. So to have that type of dynasty team, pretty much every single dynasty team has had a bona fide MVP, one of the best players of all time, superstars on their team. And both the Thunder and the Spurs have that with Victor Wembanyama and Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. Anthony Edwards is a step below that. And the first step for the Timberwolves to get to that point is the self-development from Ant needs to go up another level. And I'm not saying that's not possible. But the biggest thing that Ant is struggling with, and it's been a 3-year struggle, is his processing of the game. When teams throw a double team on him, he's really struggling to find the, open entry guy, create easy baskets for his teammates, where Shai, if you are throwing a double team on him, good luck. They're going to get open, catch and shoot three. And part of that is he's got the teammates that can make those shots. And we're seeing the Timberwolves have a lot of really good players, but they don't have a lot of great two-way players. And that is kind of the third step. So we'll just jump right into that, is you need to have a team full of excellent two-way role players. And the Timberwolves have a lot of excellent role players like Naz Reid, like Kyle Anderson, like Ayo Dosunmu, like Bones Highland, like Jalen Clark, like Terrence Shannon Jr. The problem is none of those guys are really two-way players. They all either bring an offensive or a defensive advantage, but they don't bring both. So by putting one of them in, you are sacrificing quality in another aspect. So where the Thunder, it's like all their guys are really good defenders. They are all capable of hitting either catch and shoot threes, driving, playing on the perimeter defense really well. It just sets your team up so much better. The Spurs have the same thing. So that is a issue that the Wolves are going to have to try and figure out, and bringing guys in on the margins that can do that. And Unfortunately, they don't have the draft capital to bring guys in at a cheap contract to do that. So it really sets the Wolves apart. And then the final thing is I think you need an all NBA level second tier star. The Spurs look to be very well in tune with that with Steph Castle and Dylan Harper. And then the Thunder have Chet Holmgren and Jalen Williams. Now, the Wolves did have that, I feel like, with Karl Anthony Towns, and we do not have that with Julius Randle for sure. We saw Julius's limitations, unfortunately, really rear its ugly head in this postseason and last postseason when he gets into a tough matchup. And really, even this postseason against the Nuggets, he was okay, but we didn't really see a dominant Julius that we saw in the postseason last year. But again, a lot of that had to do with the competition you were facing with the Lakers and the Warriors and them being excellent matchups. The problem, the Lakers and the Warriors are probably not the teams that you have to go through to make it to the NBA Finals. There will be no path to the NBA Finals without going through both the Thunder and the Spurs for the foreseeable future. So Julius is not going to work as that number 2 option. The problem, finding a number 2 option either A, obliterates your depth, or B, has to come from a guy that's on the roster, which, again, the Timberwolves do have a fantastic overall roster, and in many years, they would be probably the best team in the East as is right now. But they've got 2 potential all-time greats in the West. So the Timberwolves really don't have any of the 3 things needed to be that NBA championship level threat. So the Timberwolves kind of need a reset. I mean, that's kind of where we've gotten to with this team. I think that starts with you got to trade one of Julius Randle or Rudy Gobert. I would prefer them to trade Julius Randle. That being said, I don't know what Julius Randle's trade value is. I don't think he's going to net you a superstar by any means. He might get you back another disgruntled player with a kind of a larger contract than what's deserved. Can he get you an Emmanuel quickly from the Raptors? I don't think so. I think the Raptors and Julius is a weird fit. He's definitely not going to get you a Giannis Antetokounmpo or a Kyrie Irving. Maybe you could get a Ja Morant. But again, all these options to me have their issues too. So if you're going to trade Julius, I think if you can find a team that'll take his salary and you're not having to match salary, that's almost the best scenario. Bring in some depth, allow some cap flexibility potentially. But again, who's just going to want Julius's contract? And his contract is not terrible, $33 million a year. It's actually a pretty tradable deal, but at this point, I mean, Julius Randle's trade value is at an all-time low. Probably would have been better off moving him in the trade deadline, which it sounds like that's what caused all the terrible play, really, since the All-Star break. We never saw a good Julius Randle for more than 1 or 2 games, and it's just not good enough. He can't be this Batman to Ant Superman. He's just too inconsistent, too moody, does not really give you a whole lot of defense, and him and Rudy just do not work as a combo. You cannot have 2 horrendous shooters as your starting lineup, and that was the problem again, that when, we wrote about it in the Nordic Wolf, the starting lineup was a giant problem against the Spurs, and it will continue to be a giant problem. So to me, step 1, you got to hopefully move Julius Randle or Rudy Gobert. I would prefer to keep Rudy. I know he had a really bad series, but I just don't think you're going to find a better center at the contract value that you have Rudy at right now. I think it's too big of a change to try and move both Rudy and Julius unless you are able to get back a Giannis or something like that. But again, I don't see why the Bucks are going to trade us Giannis Antetokounmpo for Julius Randle and Rudy Gobert. I just don't see the value for Brooklyn in that deal. And I'm not interested in including a Jaden McDaniels or a Nas Reed in that deal. So again, I just think finding a center, I mean, look at the Lakers. DeAndre Ayton's not the answer for them. They would love a guy like Rudy. And again, if you can't move Julius, I think you got to look at moving Rudy. But our defense is going to sacrifice a lot in the regular season. And I just think Rudy does help a team that already struggles to win in the regular season, win some games. So that is my less preferred option of the two. But again, I think it's very possible, and I think it's not off the table. I think Ant is untouchable. I would not move Jaden at this point. I think Jaden is your best chance to me to build as your number 2 player. But I think you need to really, that's where I think if you could trade Julius Randle for some really good two-way affordable contracts, that is the path to, or trading him for a salary dump and then signing some free agents that can just bring something in on the margins, help Jaden out in the perimeter defense, because truly Jaden's not going to become a secondary scoring threat unless you can take some of the defensive responsibility away from him. It's just too much to ask a guy to be guarding each team's number 1 guard or forward day in and day out, and then be able to consistently put up offensive numbers that warrant being a number 2 scoring option. So I think we need to bring in other guys that can relieve Jaden of some of that burden, some of that responsibility, to allow Jaden to really conserve some energy and become more of a two-way slasher. His driving is fantastic. And I just think that is the best option forward for the Wolves if they can move that over trading for a superstar. Because I do think if you trade for a Giannis or you trade for Ja Morant or Emmanuel Quickly, like, sure, it might make your team better, but I don't think it gets you past the Spurs or the Thunder right now. They're just too deep. They're too good. They have superstars. And yes, Giannis is a top 5 superstar, and it certainly would be interesting to see him and Ant play together. But I think your window is 1 to 2 years, and then you really risk losing Ant because the team needs a full rebuild and you don't have the assets to compete without Giannis. And Giannis's career is on its last legs, honestly, and he's had injury issues for the last few years, has not been able to stay healthy. And if you're trading away all your depth and then you don't even get a healthy Giannis for half a season, you're not going to be competing. So, as fun as it would be to get that or get Kevin Durant, I just don't think that is the option for the Timberwolves if you want to win an NBA championship. So that's where I'm at with Jaden. Unrestricted free agents include Bones Highland, Jalen Clark, Joe Ingles, Kyle Anderson, Io DeSumo. I think you can bring back, and Mike Conley. So I think, and Conley has said he wants to come back. I'm fine with Conley on a vet minimum deal. I'm fine with Kyle Anderson on a vet minimum deal. I think both of those are very attainable. I think Bones Highland is probably in that range too, and I would take Bones back because Bones in the regular season was a fantastic bench player. Jalen, I think, is worth bringing back for some defensive backup. I would like to see him be really working on his shot and be a more capable corner 3-point shooter, because for him to have a spot on any NBA team in the future, he has to develop a better outside corner 3 shot. Because when he played against the Thunder, they just let Wemby kind of roam off of him, and they knew he couldn't. You can't depend on him to make more than 25% of his corner threes, and that's just not sustainable for a guy that, even though he does bring a defensive pest to him, he can't be a 0 from offense, and that's pretty much what you had. Sounds like Joe Ingles is not going to be back in the NBA. He's going to go play in Australia. Makes sense. He's from there. Probably wants to move there. So Joe is not going to be a part of the team anymore, which is a bummer. Joe, I think, was a great leader for this team, kind of a player coach, but I think Mike fills in that role pretty well. And then Io DeSumo, who I think is priority number one for a free agent to uh, bring back. So let's do a little quick research. What does an Io DeSumo contract look like? So he was on a 3-year, $21 million contract. The expected is 15 to 20 million. So he's expected to get about a 60 to 80 million dollar contract. And I think if you're the Wolves, that is a very doable thing, especially well, right now we have the opportunity to offer that contract as is. Again, I would like to move a Julius or a Rudy to a team that can take on their salary without matching salary coming back. And then I would like to bring in a few, role playing two-way players to help you compete. Again, I don't think any of this is going to get us to the level that San Antonio or Oklahoma City are at. And we don't have the draft capital to get players that are going to contribute to that. But I think it just gets you a deeper, more consistent team, and you hope that players stay healthy in your playoff run and you find a way to, to continue to compete in the playoffs. But I just don't think the Timberwolves are in a spot where you can be a championship or bust team with the Spurs and the Thunder where they're at. But I think you just bring in consistency and start playing in the regular season. I mean, we saw it in this series. This team developed so many bad habits in the regular season. And yeah, they may have flipped a switch for that Denver series and it worked against Denver. We are specifically built to beat Denver. The problem is Denver is not the team that we need to worry about right now. And what good is getting by Denver when you're just getting killed by San Antonio and Oklahoma City? I mean, you lost the game by 38, 30, 29. 3 of the 4 games. The other one you lost at home by 6. So you were outclassed. I mean, they outscored us by over 100 points in the games we won, and in the games they won. We outscored them by 5 in the 2 games we won. One of those games was when Wemby got ejected. So we're a long ways away right now, and that sucks. But for now, I just think it's bringing guys that help on the margins, give you some advantages, give you some two-way flexibility, and see where that lands. And then you hope for internal growth from Anthony Edwards and internal growth from Jaden McDaniels, Io DeSumo. Dante's not going to be back next year. Another hit. So you just need to find guys that are capable of taking that next level. It's not necessarily the answer you want to hear, but it's the only thing that Timberwolves really can do. All right. Now, let's move on to Spurs versus Thunder. As a Timberwolves fan, I wish we were talking Wolves Thunder, but as an NBA fan, this series should be fantastic. Now, the the Thunder have the same dilemma the Wolves had, which every team has when you're facing the Spurs, is Victor Wembanyama. The regular season, they never figured that out. The Thunder crushed the Spurs in the non-Wemby minutes and got crushed in the Wemby minutes, just like the Timberwolves did. So the Thunder are going to have to figure that out. And I think they're a better team and more capable of figuring that out than the Timberwolves. But these are the 2 teams that are going to be probably competing for NBA championships. Every Western Conference Finals for the next 5 to 6 years are probably going to be these 2 teams. So it's going to be the start of a pretty legendary rivalry. And I mean, my thoughts on it, if I had to put a guess on it, I would rather the Spurs win right now. I really just have no interest in how the Thunder play basketball. I think they're I think they're a very talented team that doesn't need the benefit of the whistle, and I just don't like that Shea would rather hunt the whistle than hunt the basket. And I get Thunder fans are always going to fight that and say that's not what he's doing. He's taking advantage of players getting too greedy on defense, and he does do that. I understand that is part of the game, but you can't watch him and not see the over exaggeration of contact, trying to goat the refs into calling stuff. And I just wish the NBA would put a little bit of a stop on it. Now, Steph Castle kind of did the same thing against the Wolves, but not to the degree that you see SGA. It's like when he needs a basket, a lot of times he'll hunt the foul over the basket. And it just is frustrating because he is the best mid range shooter in the NBA, does not need to do that. He could just hunt the basket and he would make a high percentage of baskets. But that's frustrating that he gets that whistle. And on the same end, it's frustrating that Alex Caruso, Lou Dort are physically assaulting players, which I like physical defense. I like when players are allowed to defend with physicality. I don't like when they're allowed to play with that physicality on the defensive end, but then on offense, they are given a whistle that is not to that level of physicality, which the Wolves struggled with last year as Caruso and Dort and Jalen Williams were all playing very handsy defense. And then as soon as Shea got into the lane and would create contact, he'd be going to the line. It is frustrating when you watch it. It's very grifty, and I hope this series does not turn into a grift fest between the Wolves or the Spurs and the Thunder. I just think it's going to be a really back and forth series of two teams that are at an extremely high level trading blows. I think the series will go 7, and I do have to lean the Thunder at this point. I do think the Spurs are going to steal game 1, and I think they're going to put the Thunder on their heels. I think they could go up even. I think they could. There's a chance that they're up 3-1 and the Thunder figure it out and were to make a comeback. Like, that would not shock me. That is how good the Thunder team is. I just believe when you get into a clutch situation, I have more faith that Shea Gilgeous-Alexander is going to make a shot over anyone in the Spurs. Now, the emergence of Dylan Harper that we've seen in the playoffs does change things because he was not playing that well in the regular season. The Spurs won the regular season series 4-1. One of those games, the Thunder pretty much sat everybody. So really 3-1 of meaningful games. In the one game the Thunder won, Wemby and Shea had a knee-to-knee contact, which Wemby missed a good portion of the second half. He did come in the fourth, but the Thunder were able to build a pretty continuous lead. The story is the Thunder were able to mostly build margin and create advantages in the non-Wemby minutes, which, again, the Wolves did the same thing. The difference is Wemby is playing more. He was playing like 28, 29 minutes a night in the regular season. Now he's closer to 34 to 36. So the timing of non-Wemby minutes are just tougher. But I think the Thunder are a deeper, more well-balanced team. I still think Shea is a little bit better than Wemby. And I think these teams are going to trade blows for the next, like I said, 5 to 6 years. Round 1, though, I would push that advantage to the Thunder. So that is my series preview of the series that I wish was not happening. All right. So as we enter the offseason, kind of wanted to just give you guys an update of what things are going to look like from my podcast newsletter going forward. So for the most part, non-news, breaking news stuff, you're going to see a podcast once a week. Probably record every Sunday, release Sunday night for the Monday. And then, news, that's going to be busy Sundays. So articles are going to come out probably Sundays too. I'll probably write them Fridays through Sundays, just kind of take turns, once on the Vikings, once on the Timberwolves, just kind of give some off-season updates. They might not be very long articles depending on what's been going on. Trying to find some unique things maybe to write about, create some cool stories. But then obviously if there's any breaking news, things like that, we may do a quick recording to kind of break it down, or else a quick newsletter, depending on, where my capabilities lay out for a week to week thing. But, I do want to continue to put out content, continue to improve at this, but I also want to take advantage of the off season. I do have a personal life that I would, my girlfriend, my dog would love a little bit of extra time to hang out. So that's kind of where we're at. Uh, Before we leave today, we haven't talked a lot of Viking stuff, which this show is going to be a mixture of Vikings and Wolves. And we're going to, probably start to see a transfer to more football talk than basketball as things go here, especially after the NBA finals. We'll probably do a little bit of coverage here and there about outside series. But for the Vikings, there has been some news since my last article. Obviously, the draft happened. We've had free agency, which I did cover some free agency. It wasn't a very active free agency. So not a real exciting Vikings offseason. Obviously, the draft was interesting. They're still in the hunt for a general manager, which, again, hard for me to know a lot. I don't know a lot about number two executives through other teams in the NFL. So to come out here and say this is my favorite, I hope the team is looking for the right culture fit for what we have. I don't necessarily the name, the face. It was the same thing for the last general manager search. You just got to kind of trust that the organization is going to make the right decision. And last time they didn't make the right decision with the Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah pick for general manager. But the one thing that did happen this week that I can talk a little about is the Minnesota Vikings and the NFL in general had their NFL schedule release. And, I actually do like where the Vikings schedule laid out. So they start week 1 against Green Bay at home. Reports are Micah Parsons is good chance to end up on the PUP list to start the season, which puts him out minimum 4 weeks to go start. And whether it's JJ McCarthy or Kyler Murray, which obviously is going to be a huge talking point through the summer, all reports are it's going to be a full-on competition, which, theoretically right now, I expect Kyler Murray to win that competition. But for his first game as a Viking, I would love it to be against Green Bay without Micah Parsons. Week 2, you go to Chicago. Again, great time to play Chicago. We won week 1 in Chicago last year. And I think if you can avoid going there late season where their field becomes a mess, fantastic. Then week 3, you're in Tampa Bay. I think Tampa Bay is a very winnable game. I'm not a fan of Todd Bowles as a head coach. I think he's a fantastic defensive coordinator. I think it's a pretty winnable game. And then you're going against Dolphins and the New Orleans Saints. Dolphins at home, Saints on the road. Again, two teams that were bottom feeders last year. I think the Dolphins are going to be worse than last year. And the Saints, while Tyler Shuck showed some improvements, you look at who he played, I'm not sold on him as an NFL quarterback. I think the Saints are going to be one of those teams that a lot of people have high expectations for, and then they kind of don't deliver because their quarterback is not as good as people thought they were. And then, you got a week 6 bye, and then you come out of the bye, you host the Indianapolis Colts. Daniel Jones, who is coming off an Achilles tear. Again, I thought even before the Achilles tear last year, Daniel Jones was starting to look kind of what Daniel Jones has always been. So, I mean, realistically, you could go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, probably 5-1 in those first 6 games. Then they go to Detroit. They swept Detroit last year. I don't expect them to sweep Detroit again next year. Then they host the Bills on a big Monday Night Football game, go to Green Bay, a Mexico City game against the 49ers, and then hosting the Falcons, hosting the Panthers Thursday night in New England. That's going to be a really tough one. Host the Detroit Lions, host the Washington Commanders, at the Jets, at the Bears. I mean, I think that's a very winnable schedule. A lot can happen. Hard to break down late season games because you just don't know where injuries are going to land. But I don't think it's as daunting of a schedule as what it seemed like maybe at the end of the season as things have shaped up. I think the return of Brian Flores as our defensive coordinator is going to be fantastic. I expect Harrison Smith at this point to come back just because we haven't heard anything. And I feel like if Harrison was not going to come back, he would have let the team know at an um, earlier point for drafting purposes. It would make sense why maybe they passed on a Dylan Thieneman, which I wasn't a fan just from people that I've talked to and trust. So, overall, I'm getting excited for the NFL season, especially now the Wolves season's over. It gives me a little bit more of an opening to talk about it. Last point, the last free agent they did bring in, one of the last two, I thought big dominoes to fall when it comes to discussing NFL free agents, and that was Juwan Jennings. He will fill the role as a third receiver, and he's a much different receiver than they've had in the past for that third receiver. Obviously, last year it was Jalen Naylor, who was heading over to the Vegas Raiders. Great contract. But they're bringing in Juwan Jennings, who his receiving skills are not what you bring him in for, in my opinion. He is a tough, in the trenches, does the dirty work wide receiver that this team desperately needs. He does give you a little bit of a bigger body in the red zone, but the guy does not shy away from, doing the dirty work, blocking, helping. He's an awesome receiver in the run game. He gives you size that Addison and Jefferson just do not have for us. And I just think he's a great option. Not the best route runner, but he's going to get you some uh, really, really great opportunities in the run game. He's going to open things up for a lot of other guys. And I mean, he's still capable of being, he was then looked at as going to be the number one receiver in San Francisco. Injuries have kind of always hampered him. But again, as our third receiver, he gives us an option, especially if you do have games where Jefferson or Addison misses. He does give you that option. He may not be the crispest route runner, but he's something. And it was a area of need that the Vikings needed to address. So pretty happy with that. All right. That's all I got for you guys today. Thank you so much for joining. As I said, we're going to start seeing a once a week podcast, kind of keep on that schedule. As the football season gets closer into preseason, we're probably going to start gearing that up. I'd like to have a betting focused episode every probably Thursday during the regular, or once the season kind of gets kicked off. And then I want to try and do a film breakdown this year, every year, kind of learning the ins and outs of watching NFL film, kind of breaking down what I'm seeing from that. So that's something that we're going to probably do a podcast on probably. So the betting would probably be every Friday, the film breakdown every Wednesday, just to kind of go through what I'm seeing on film versus what I see from the regular season. Obviously, we'll be doing some postings. So we'll probably do 3 podcasts a week during the NFL regular season. And then as the NBA season kicks off in October, then, through the end of the NFL season, there's probably going to be once a week Wolves coverage just because it's so early in the season with the 82 game season. And if the Wolves can't bother to show up for those games, I can't really hold the capacity to cover that much football and basketball. So yeah, we're going to start to see a little bit more in probably about a month and a half, really focused towards NFL stuff for the next probably 6 months. And then after the NFL season, once you get into the playoffs and I have a little more capacity again, we'll be kind of gearing up. That's kind of what things are going to look like. So again, thank you for joining, and we will be back next week.